Well, it took me a month to get a hold of the Stage 3 voting results, and, well, you're looking at them now, so that's how things look like, and as an end result, Latios and Sky Shaymin will both remain Uber, well, I would say permanently, but as Latias and Celebi experienced in the past, nothing is really permanent when it comes to the Uber tiering, so I'm just gonna say indefinitely. By the way, red represents the votes for Ubers and green the votes for Standard. Now Latios isn't really a surprise. After all, the 20 extra points that it has in special attack over Latias are way more useful than Latias's extra defenses. It seems we live in an era where offense is always privileged over defense. That's my impression anyway, and so it's not really surprising to see Latios go. But one thing that I still kind of find funny is the fact that Latias and Latios are in two different tiers. And, well, yeah, they're a lot alike, but it seems that even this difference, even as small as it looks, is enough to make a difference. But I'm thinking that in the next generation, Latios will be brought down to overused someday. Because I honestly can't see how it could get any better. It already has that mammoth special attacking move pool of death, so it's bound to stagnate and to be brought down to standard someday. Just not now, obviously. And next up is Sky Shaymin, who, when it was first sent up to Ubers, it was by the slimmest margin possibly imaginable. One single vote. And what struck me as odd in this vote is that the month before it was voted Uber, it was only 16 on the usage list in the standard ladder. So I was really surprised to see it go. Then again, at the time I didn't know that Seed Flare lowered special defense by 2 levels instead of just 1, so I guess the joke was on me. So now people got a chance to play around with it on the suspect ladder, see what it was made of, and the result was a lot less tight this time around. 58 for Uber, 26 for Overused. So we're not going to be seeing Sky Shaymin in Standard for a couple years, it seems. And then we have Mr. Controversy himself, Garchomp. He's so controversial, in fact, that a lot of people who aren't necessarily top-level players don't understand why it's Uber to begin with. After all, it doesn't look like it's so different from the likes of Salamence at first. But all I gotta say, it's an addition of small details that, when put together, make it, wait, I wouldn't say simply too strong for Standard, because as you can see, the result is very, very, very close. A margin of only 3 votes, in fact. But to put it simply, those things are the reason why Garchomp is suspect and Salamence isn't. No one thinks Salamence should be Uber, and here you got about half of the voting pool that thinks Garchomp should be Uber. Now, one interesting thing about Garchomp is that it was used a lot more than anything else on the ladder, including Latios and Sky Shaymin. Now, I don't know what causes this, if it's so much worse than those two. Perhaps it's because Latios and Sky Shaymin were easier to make an opinion on, because they're simply a lot stronger than Garchomp are, so people decided to focus on Garchomp instead and really try it out and see if it is too good or if it in fact isn't. Now that's just a theory. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't claim to have the absolute truth, but if that is the case, then more power to the players who tried it out. Instead of, taking their preconceived opinions all the way to the voting, they actually gave the thing a try to see exactly what it can and can't do. So, yeah, if that is the case, then thank you to everyone who tried to use it, no matter which side you were on. But it doesn't matter who, what, or why. The fact is that it's simply a majority that's too slim to base a permanent tiering on. So what Smogon decided to do is that if Garchomp gets 2 majority votes in a row, then it will be Uber. Either that or a super majority vote of 2/3 or more, like Shaymin and Latios got. But as for Garchomp, it's going to have to get another majority in the next round of voting. And then they're going to keep on voting until every Pokemon is decidedly voted overused. So for example, if Garchomp gets another majority, they're going to do a round 3 with just Manaphy and Latias, and if those two get voted into the overused tier again, then Manaphy will be brought down to overused, and that will be the end of it. That's how they're planning to make it work anyway. And speaking of Manaphy, this test was special in that it was the first chance it ever got of competing in something that approaches the standard metagame. And, you know, I always wondered why it was Uber in the first place. I mean, when the game first came out, everyone... Well, I wouldn't say everyone had their own list of Ubers, because everyone knew that Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, Darkrai, and Arceus were most decidedly Uber. But a lot of people thought that Manaphy simply wasn't cut out to be Uber. After all, it needed Drizzle support in order to be at its best, and there were no Drizzle users in Standard, and there will probably never be because of how the ability is broken in the first place, but that's another debate for another day. But yeah, nobody thought it was really cut out to be Uber, and then one day we woke up and BAM! Manaphy was Uber! And no one really knew why, we just sort of accepted it, I think. But it never was tested to this day, unlike the other 4. So this really was the first chance Manaphy had of shining in the standard metagame, or at least something that was relatively close to it. And the truth is that perhaps the result was rather close. Not as close as Garchomp, but close enough that it makes me think that maybe we haven't given it enough credit back then. After all, it does have a fairly interesting arsenal to play around with, even without Drizzle support or anything like that. It's still more than just fairly decent. It may not be brutally overpowered, but it's still nice to have on anyone's team nonetheless. And finally we have Latias, and that blowout really was something that most people expected, to be honest. After all, it's been in the standard metagame for quite a few months now, and it has never showed any signs of being overpowered or over-centralizing or anything like that, though its usage has followed somewhat the same curve as others that were tested before and that were ultimately brought back into Ubers after being downgraded, such as Wobbuffet and Emerald Deoxys. Now, I'm not going to compare Latias to those two, because those two are way better than Latias to begin with. But when it started, Latias' usage was, well, I think it was off of the top 10 for a few months, and then it started going back up, and then it was number 5 last month, I think. Still, that's not even close to being overpowered. So I imagine that experience on the standard ladder was enough to make most people say Latias is okay. Which is also part of the problem, you see, because we were supposed to evaluate the Pokemon on the suspect ladder, and on the suspect ladder, to be honest, no one gave 2 hoots about Latias, because Latios was allowed and it was a lot better. Therefore, Latias' usage was way down. No one really used it. So it's going to be interesting to see in round 2 how Latias fares without Latios around. There's no doubt that its usage is going to skyrocket compared to the first round, but just how much? And is it going to be enough for it to gain a few more votes? Of course, if there's another blowout like this, I don't imagine that if there is a round 3, that it's going to be voted on, because the outcome would simply be too obvious if we voted on this over and over and over again. So this concludes my take on the first round results of the Stage 3 test. So have a nice day and happy battling!